The top 10 of the worst torture methods in history. Number 10. The Brazen Bull. The horrific brazen bull torture device originated in ancient Greece. This terrible device was created by the Athens-based brass artisan and inventor Perillos in the 6th century BC. Phalaris, the dictator of Sicily, gave the order to make it. The design's goal was to provide an execution method that would frighten anyone who opposed the tyrant's rule. The brazen bull was a life-size bronze statue of a bull with an opening on one side. Before the bull was sealed shut, this door was used to place the victims within. A fire was built beneath the bull, slowly heating the metal until it was red hot. As the temperature inside the bull's cavity rose, the sufferer went through horrific pain. Because of the way the bull's head was created, the victim's suffering may be perceived as menacing, terrifying noises that resembled the cry of a genuine bull. The victim and witnesses experienced a greater level of psychological terror as a result of this ghoulish element. As the bronze heated, the small space turned into a terrible chamber of agonizing torture. When the victim's flesh touched the scorching metal, it would sizzle and burn badly. The combination of extreme heat and poor ventilation led to a painful and prolonged death. The brazen bull originated in ancient Greece, but it was also used during the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero to execute early Christians. Number 9. The Iron Maiden. Not this one. This one. In Europe during the Middle Ages, the horrifying and well-known Iron Maiden torture device first made its appearance. Its exact historical origins are unknown, but in the late 1700s, it gained notoriety as a tool of torture and fear. This horrible device was mostly utilized by the authorities to coerce confessions, punish the accused, and instill dread in the minds of potential criminals. The Iron Maiden, with its inner surfaces elaborately covered with deadly spikes, looked like a high, vertical cabinet or tomb. After entering, the individual was equipped with precise shackles that limited mobility and forced them to remain upright. When the maiden's door closed, the victim suffered excruciating pain and terrible puncture wounds from the spikes, which were designed to avoid vital organs. The purpose of the spikes was to cause more suffering for the victim than to instantly kill them. As the spikes steadily pierced the body, they produced unbearable pain and misery. As time passed, the deeper spikes continued to support the victim's weight and stop them from moving. Number 8. The rack. The horrific torture tool known as the rack has its roots in early modern and medieval Europe. It developed during a period when various physical torture techniques were being developed to coerce confessions and punish people who were believed to have committed crimes. The earliest documented usage of the rack dates from the late 14th century, and it continued to be in use well into the 18th century. It was a simple but incredibly powerful weapon consisting of a rectangular frame with a roller and a set of ropes or chains fastened to either end. The victim's wrists and ankles were secured to the frame by the rollers. The torturer turned the rollers while the victim's limbs were stretched in different directions, causing excruciating pain. It resulted in severe muscular strains, bone fractures, and dislocated joints. The victim suffered greatly on both a physical and mental level. The horrifying idea that the tormentor may continue to apply pressure until the victim confessed has passed away added to the excruciating feeling of the body being stretched out. The rack was a well-liked tactic used to get confessions from anyone facing charges, whether they were imagined or actual crimes. During the Spanish Inquisition, it was utilized on a number of significant historical occasions to coerce those who were suspected of religious offenses into confessing to blasphemy. It was also used in England during the time of Queen Elizabeth I to coerce confessions from those who were allegedly planning an uprising against the Queen. Number 7. The Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish, also known as the Spanish pear or the choke pear, is a horrifying and brutal torture tool that was used in early modern and medieval times. With a wicked inventiveness, this device was created to cause agony and shame to its victims. It consisted of a pear-shaped piece made of wood or metal with parts that could be enlarged by turning a key. The tool was made specifically to inflict severe emotional and bodily suffering. The pear of anguish was inserted into various bodily holes, depending on the intended humiliation or penalty. There were numerous types of devices, including vaginal, anal, and oral pears, each intended to target a certain type of pain. When the key was turned and the instrument expanded inside the chosen orifice, it caused excruciating pain as it stretched and sometimes tore the surrounding tissues. Changing how much the key was turned might make the victim's pain worse. It has been used historically in many different contexts, usually as a means of punishment and cruel treatment. On occasion, it was used to punish those accused of blasphemy or sexual misconduct. In particular, female victims had their vaginal pairs removed as a form of punishment and public humiliation. The anal pair, on the other hand, faced the male victims and was positioned rectally. Apart from causing bodily pain, the pair of anguish was designed to humiliate and denigrate the sufferer, reinforcing societal conventions and authoritative figures. Number 6. Chinese water torture. Chinese water torture is an extremely disturbing form of torture that is surprisingly simple. This contraption uses water droplets to cause agony, as opposed to traditional physical kinds of torture. Usually, the victim is seated or laid flat with their head immobilized. A water-filled container is positioned above the victim's forehead, and a little droplet of water is let to fall onto the same location of the forehead regularly. The method is straightforward, but when combined, the effects are really unnerving. The consistent, rhythmic raindrops induce extreme psychological pain, including anxiety and a sense of powerlessness. The effect of the single droplet increases with time as it keeps hitting the same location. Even though the water droplet is first harmless, it soon begins to feel like a continuous hammer blow to the same tiny location on the forehead. Since the victim's mind fights with the repetition, anxiety, and helplessness that come with the technique, it results in a considerable level of psychological stress. The slow deterioration of the victim's mental state is one disconcerting aspect of this type of torture. Number 5. The breaking wheel. In medieval Europe, the breaking wheel was a deadly and brutal device. It meant to obtain terrible death as punishment on its victims. The device was created in the late Middle Ages, primarily in Europe, when it was used for public spectacle and the imposition of the death penalty. The breaking wheel was a terrifying instrument. Usually, the victim was strapped to a large cartwheel or wooden wheel. With their limbs spread wide and fastened to the wheel's spokes, they were immobilized. The wheel was then raised and set atop a tall post or frame. The executioner would next repeatedly strike the victim's limbs with heavy wooden or iron rods, shattering bones in the process. Rather than instantaneous death, significant bodily injury was the intended outcome. Each hit broke bones and left the victim in agonizing pain. The broken and damaged body was left to languish on the wheel for hours or days at a time. When the time came, dehydration, shock, or blood loss were the causes of death. The breaking wheel has been used historically in a number of cases, particularly for those convicted of heinous crimes like treason, murder, and blasphemy. As more human methods of execution became available, its use decreased throughout time, though it was still used sporadically into the early modern. It has had a persistent impact on popular opinion. Their horrific nature has been depicted in mythology, literature, and art, and it frequently serves as a metaphor for the brutality of the past. Number 4. The Spanish donkey. The Spanish donkey, also referred to as the wooden horse, is an odd and brutal tool of torture that dates back to early modern and medieval Europe. This uncomfortable implement derives its name from the form it imitates, a wooden apparatus featuring a narrow, triangular saddle like to a donkey's. The victim of the Spanish donkey was made to balance by placing their legs on either side of the sharp edge of the triangular saddle. Their hands were often bound or attached to weights, which added to the pressure and suffering. The victim's weight was supported by the thin edge, causing immense pressure and agony to their perineum, genitalia, or rectal area. The body's weight and the edge's sharpness caused terrible discomfort that may have resulted in serious injury. A significant role in the history of torture and punishment has been played by the Spanish donkey. It was frequently used to coerce confessions or as a means of public humiliation and punishment. The instrument was employed during the Spanish Inquisition and in a number of European countries in the 16th and 17th century. The extent of the pain and the manner it was portrayed in public made it a useful tool for creating fear and control. Number 3. The rat torture. A horrifying and violent kind of torture known as rat torture involves the victim suffering at the hands of rodents, mainly rats. It is characterized by the victim being placed in an enclosed space, usually a cage or container, with rats, and the rats being kept in harsh conditions. The rats turn the victims into torture objects because they are scared or hungry and utilize their bodies as a way of escape. The abuse of the rats resulted in excruciating bodily and mental agony. Rats become aware of the impending peril when they get a close-up look at the victims. The mental misery and anxiety that accompany this realization might be even more scary than the physical pain. Driven by their instincts, the mice bite and claw at the victim in their desperate attempt to escape, leaving deep puncture wounds and severe pain. The combination of agony, fear, and powerlessness in this form of torture is horrible. Rat torture has been used historically, usually as a kind of public punishment or to coerce confessions. During the Middle Ages, it was employed as a tool for torture and execution throughout Europe. During the Vietnam War, there is a well-known historical incident where rats were used to torture prisoners of war, causing severe physical and psychological damage. Number 2. Scaphism. Scaphism, or the boats, is a horrifying and ancient method of execution and torture used in Persia. Greek historian Plutarch first wrote about the horrifying practice in the 1st century AD. He described it as a form of capital punishment involving terrible agony and suffering. Scaphism victims were either put between hollowed-out tree trunks or 2 miniature boats. The victims' limbs were left exposed, but their body was kept within the boats. The executioners would then try to induce severe diarrhea by forcefully feeding the victim a concoction of milk and honey. This concoction had 2 purposes. The food prevented the victim from passing away too quickly, and the diarrhea attracted insects and fostered filth and illness. Eventually, the victim would die from extreme discomfort as the insects ate away at their exposed flesh. Because of the continuing spread of insects and parasites, together with the unbearable suffering, Scaphism was one of the most painful means of execution ever devised. Scaphism is notorious for its violent and sadistic inclinations. Though it originated in ancient Persia, it was not limited to that region. Amazing tales of history describe its use in a number of places, including the Middle East and Greece. It was used as a tool of punishment and death, usually for political dissidents and those found guilty of major crimes. Number 1. The blood eagle. Probably the most atrocious kind of torture in human history is blood eagle. It is Viking in origin. Only those who had either committed the most heinous crimes or were enemies of Viking culture received this ritualistic punishment. It was seen to be the pinnacle of brutality. It was a terrible and inhumane display of power and vengeance. The blood eagle technique was disgusting and disturbing. The victim would be tied up and placed face down, with their back sliced open along the vertebrae. The victim's lungs and ribs would then be pulled out through the wounds by the executioner, creating an outline resembling the spread wings of an eagle. This agonizing and prolonged process would end with the victim's death, usually from a mixture of shock, blood loss, and organ damage. The brutal nature of the blood eagle and the ceremonial nature of its execution made it a horrifying and well-known kind of punishment. The Viking Age, which lasted from the late 9th to the early 11th century, is when it was practiced. It was a time of intricate legends, conflicts, and incursions. The mythology and myths of the Norse gods are said to have served as inspiration for the fabled blood eagle. The blood eagle is viewed with fear and disapproval in contemporary times. It is considered to be extremely cruel behavior and a violation of human rights. The controversy and fury surrounding the blood eagle have not decreased despite its historical and mythological background.